On the 22nd of February 2006, a masked gang forced Colin Dixon, a Securitas manager, to unlock the doors to his Tonbridge Depot. Earlier, men posing as police officers have kidnapped Mr Dixon's wife and child in Herne Bay. They threatened to kill them unless he does what they say. It's a terrifying ordeal and the stakes could not be higher. Inside the depot lie millions of pounds in new and used banknotes. £53 million will be stolen, and Kent police are about to investigate what will become Britain's biggest ever robbery. The man in charge of the investigation, Detective Chief Inspector Mick Judge, takes up the story.
Well, the initial call came in to report that a robbery had been committed, and it was also known at that time that a member of staff had been kidnapped. And that commenced the inquiry, and officers attended the scene. And very quickly it was established that an awful lot of money had been stolen. Now this actually took a couple of days for the scale of this to actually build. So over those few days it was actually ascertaining the facts of the case, but we didn't actually realise the enormity until we had the final count, which showed just under £53 million had been stolen. So that then really brought the inquiry into focus, and we realised how large it was. I think what we mustn't forget out of this, and this is where the stance we've always come from. Yes, there was a vast amount of money stolen, £53 million. But to achieve this, we had a family of 3 kidnapped, and we had 14 people working in that depot that were bound and locked in metal cages. So there's a real, a lot of money stolen, but even if there hadn't been that amount of money stolen, there's still the human side of kidnap. So that made it a very, very serious offence from the start. I mean, we had a core investigatory team of over 100 officers. But when we consider the search teams that we had going, we must have had close at times to 200 officers working on this. And of course we had to have business as usual for the Kent Police. So that continued. But a huge amount of officers, and what we've had to do, we've kept this core in place down to a final team that I work with now, that have taken it all the way through, right through to the first court appearance.
As the facts came to light, the lengths the thieves had gone to shocked police.
Our first evidence of any planning was actually in July 2005. So there was some initial planning then, but it really started to pick up during January. Lots of activity, lots of purchase of vehicles that we used, reconnaissance around trying to identify Mr Dixon, his home address, the purchase of other items, the prosthetics really built up. And then on the day in question, I mean, it was, quite a quick operation. If you look, they had to find a means of gaining entry into that depot, and that means was by the manager, Mr Dixon, and he was their entry in. He had been stopped, Mr Dixon had been stopped on the way home by a vehicle which he thought was a police car, and he was stopped what he thought was for speeding, but clearly he wasn't, and he was kidnapped. Later on, Mrs Dixon had 2 officers that came to the address who actually had stated that he'd been involved in an accident and they were going to take her to see him. And that is how, we knew there was something. They must have been wearing some kind of disguises, because there was nothing at that stage to indicate they were anything other than police officers. Now we must bear in mind that they were wearing uniforms, and I don't think people necessarily have a great deal of detail. The point was, it's in the middle of the evening, people dressed as police officers saying that your partner's been involved in an accident, and so our priority was actually to get out the house with the family and go and see Colin. Once they had gained entry, they knew, and we say from the filming inside the depot, they knew where they had to go to and how to obtain control. And once they had done that, then it was a matter of loading a lorry, which is what they did, and then they made off from the scene. So all of the preparation work that took place to actually, was quite meticulous. Then they had the money, and then, that's when they had to then somehow get rid of it. And by then, obviously, the investigation had started. Very quickly, we had some information that led us to our first arrest. And our first arrests were taking place by the Thursday. And if you remember, the robbery had taken place overnight on the Tuesday, Wednesday. And very quickly, we had our first arrests in South East London. Now, at that early stage, we knew that members of the Dixon family had been kidnapped by people who were purporting to be police officers. And clearly their faces had not been masked or covered. So it was our first indication here that actually we're talking about perhaps some kind of prosthetic sort of mask and covering. And again, the information started to grow. And by that weekend, we then had two further arrests over that weekend. And of course, with each arrest, you have to understand that we also have scenes that have got to be searched. And so we started a massive search, not only forensically, but also a very detailed search for evidence. We also found that by the early part of the following week, we arrested two further people. So very quickly we had 6 people that were in custody. And so we're also now having to start on the court presentation because we have certain time limits. So what I'm doing is put it into perspective. Right at the start, we had early arrests. We had a huge amount of officers involved in searches, but we also had to commence our court procedures.
To hear what happened in court, watch part 2 of the Securitas Robbery, the trial.